Moving on now. Let's talk about the Philadelphia Phillies. Um, so like I said before, I think that the Phillies are a fifth seed wildcard team at best, and I think that's kind of the general consensus with the Phillies fan base. So how optimistic am I about the Phillies' chances to even get in the playoffs this season? Like I said, I think they have to rely on the Braves or Mets not meeting their potential, and I think with the Mets it's more likely because the Mets have not gotten up to their potential in the last few years as well. So, if the Mets wind up not meeting their potential, whether it's because they just aren't as good as people thought they would be, or it's because they have a ton of injuries and a ton of key injuries and they wind up not being as good as a result. But that's the first thing. They've got to rely on the Braves or Mets not meeting their potential. That's the only way they get that second spot because the first wild card team is going to be the Padres. So it's going to be about the second wild card spot. So the second team in the division in the NL East is probably going to be the one that makes the playoffs. The Central is really weak. Aside from the Cardinals and maybe the Cubs, I guess, who else is going to make the playoffs from the NL Central? So the Phillies have to beat the Mets. That should be their goal. Because even with injuries, I think the Braves are going to win the division. Even if they have a few key injuries, they're still going to get them back. They're still going to win the division. So your goal has to be ahead of the Mets all season. And to do this, what you have to do on the field is your bullpen has to perform. They haven't in years past, but now they've upgraded their bullpen. They've brought in guys like Tony Watson and Jose Alvarado, who are supposed to be kind of these Alvarado's kind of a veteran pitcher, not really. Tony Watson is a veteran pitcher. So you've made this upgrade, and then on the hitting side, your offense has to be consistent, and the hitting has been really inconsistent the last few years. Even when they brought in Charlie Manuel to fix the problem, they were still not hitting consistently as well as they should have. There were definitely a few one-run games that they put up, leaving the bases loaded, grounding into a ton of double plays, that sort of thing. You can't do as much of that this season as you did in the last few seasons. And that should be obvious, but that's kind of the key for the Phillies to even have a chance to begin with. And the main thing I'm worried about now is that their starting pitching has faltered in spring training. And I'm not talking about last night. That wasn't really, those guys that pitched last night weren't really their quote-unquote starters. I was a little concerned about Alvarado giving up a couple runs. But I'm mainly concerned about Nola and Wheeler giving up a lot of runs in at least one game apiece. The other night, Wheeler gave up, I think it was 7 runs in one inning. Nola's ERA is somewhere around 6 for spring training. Wheeler's is, I think, 6 or 7. You just hope that this isn't kind of a precursor to the season. Tyler Glasnow, a couple of years ago in 2019, he, in spring training, he was pretty bad. He was trying something different with his pitching, but then they got to the regular season, and the Rays wound up, he was their top pitcher until he got injured and was out for most of the season. But he could have been he was a Cy Young candidate for the Rays in the 2019 season. And so you just hope, if you're a Phillies fan, that it'll be a similar story, minus the injury part with Nola and Wheeler. That they're just not playing well in spring training, but when we get to the regular season, it'll be fine. And so if they get in that 5th seeded wild card spot, your path to the World Series is to play all of the teams that traditionally have choked. And to do that, first of all, you have to beat the Padres, who aren't really a traditional choking team. but will probably be in the playoffs this season and will probably be in the wild card round. And you're going to have to find a way to beat them, whether, and they have experience now in the playoffs because of that tournament last year. So you can't even say inexperience might play a factor. But they have to upset the Padres in that wild card game somehow. The same way that the Nationals upset the Brewers in 2019. That should be your starting point. You have to upset the Padres, and then you just have to hope that your next matchups line up so they're easily choking matchups. And to do that, you have to have pretty much the same thing that you had in the National League race that the Nationals had. You have to go up against the Dodgers, who normally choke in the postseason, and then you have to go up against the Braves. I don't think they went up against the Cardinals, who beat the choking Braves in 2019. So you have to beat the Dodgers, hope that they choke again, and then you have to go and hope that the Braves choke again in the NLCS, or that the Cardinals upset them again, and then the Cardinals do what they did in the NLCS and also in 2019. And then you have to hope your World Series matchup is either with an inexperienced White Sox or Blue Jays team or an injured Yankees team. Somehow an injured Yankees team.